Welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Brandon, and today we're looking at Overlord again. This time we're looking at the 8 standby variant of the build. So this set has quite a few opportunities and quite a few different builds that you can take this. The most popular build being the salvage bar build that we took a look at 2 weeks ago. This time around we're looking at the 8 standby build. I think this build is also very strong and has a lot of potential as well. Definitely something also to be keeping an eye out on. It is pretty weak to itself, right? The salvage bar build is very much kind of an anti-board based deck, being able to clear out opponents' boards. This being a standby build, being kind of a little bit more board centric, does kind of require some of those things in play, so it would be a pretty substantial hit against it. However, I still think that this has a lot of opportunities and presents a lot of different things that are worthwhile. Looking at the kind of combos themselves, we do have the level 1 combo with Ions. This is on standby, 8 standby build. When your opponent becomes reversed, you may salvage a character. That's it. It's a 7/5, salvage a character on reverse, which is fine. So fine. It's on standby, so you can standby in the 2/2, which gives it 1500 power. So realistically, it's more like 9. 9's pretty good to get a reverse. So especially with where things are right now, as it's kind of shifting a little bit to be a little less board based, you could actually potentially find some reversibles at that kind of 9 level. So having that kind of reverse isn't a terrible thing. Realistically, it's kind of an extra thing here. On the reverse, you're trying to get the counter or trying to get some other tech piece. Like your big pieces, you're going to be standbying in anyway. So your on reverse salvage is just more of a opportunity to get those tech pieces in, get your counters in. Because the real combo that we're really focusing this deck around comes in at technically level 2. At level 2, we have the 2/2 Intent of the Operation Albedo. This is the assist to front characters by 1500 power, but it has the climax combo. When you're at level 2, you can pay 1, ditch 1, and then send this card to Waiting Room to spawn the 3/2 from Waiting Room into that spot. And in addition to that, you also get the 2/2 counter into hand. So not only do you get the 3/2 on field, which when it comes on field heals, you get the counter that pairs with it to be able to give it Neg Soul. And because it combos with the same climax, the level 3, when it attacks, burns 1, and then gets anti-burn until the end of your opponent's next turn. So all of a sudden, at level 2, you have a 2/2 that turns into a 3/2 that heals, gains its own Neg Soul from Waiting Room to hand as a counter, which in addition to the Neg Soul is a 1500 counter. You heal, and because of course it's a standby combo, you also can stand something in. So you can potentially stand more power into that back row. So you can get a bigger board, get a bigger place ready to go. For pay 1, pitch 1, switch it out. You refund your hand. You have now 3/2 on board for a pay 1 that also healed. So it's effectively a pay 1 heal. And then now you have anti-burn as well. So now your opponents can't burn you when they're facing off against that character. But it's also worth noting that it's also during your opponent's climax phase and this card's battle. So combos that would normally hit can't. It's also done by the auto effects of your opponent's characters. So like, technically, the burn ones off of the event package from Eins in the first build that we did earlier in the channel, those would still be able to go through. Because it's neither during the climax phase nor during the battle steps. So like the burn ones from memory, to be able to do that from the Eins package, still go through. Which is why that deck is a little bit better than this one. However, this part here takes away the rest of that Eins combo, where you can effectively turn all of those swings into Neg Souls. The event itself is a -3 soul, so it's a pay 2 -3, which means that you can effectively turn off most top ends. Because effectively, if you're removing burns, you turn those swings into vanilla swings. But if additionally you turn those vanilla swings into Neg Souls, those are problems for everyone to deal with. So now their vanilla swings coming at you are now -3 soul. So unless they are swinging for more than 3 soul, they're not dealing damage. There's some ways around it, right? Like there are some ways you can do it. Like main phase burns are a big thing here. We see that a little bit with like Tokyo Revengers. One of the other big things with this, another weakness of this deck, is that the 2/2 counter is required to have the level 3 in play. So if you're able to remove the level 3 from play before getting to counter phase, you have to have the 3/2 on field to be able to use the counter. So if your opponents are able to remove it from field, you can't neg soul. That's a big problem. But outside of those things, realistically, this is kind of the bully deck, right? This is the, hey, you have to be able to meet a certain threshold to be able to play the game. That's what this deck is for. And that's what this deck does. It's going to help set up those ways and help get to that neg soul combo top end at 2. We have a couple different ways to go about it. At 0, we run Gazing at the Intruder CZ. This allows us to gain additional power when we get reverses, so we're able to kind of snowball that power forward. It also has a Brainstorm that's look at 3, choose 1, so we could potentially use this to get more climaxes into hand. It also can help us mill through our deck potentially a little bit faster, as we have potential to look at more cards. But a pretty effective tool getting climaxes to hand, because realistically, you want to stand by just about every turn, right? You want to get as many standbys as possible. We also run Infiltration as the Capital Chaltier. This is our CX swap, so we can get to the right climax that we need, so we can get our level 2 climax when we need it, or our level 1 climax when we need it. Ideally, we're probably just only needing the level 2. That's about the only time we really desperately need the switch in. But if you're able to pull off the level 1 combo as well, having it's really nice too. It also has the ability to kick off zeros on your opponent's stage if there's only 1 card on stage, in the front stage. So if you have some pretty troublesome runners on your opponent's board and only have 1 of, you can remove it. We also run the Fuka. This is the Dark Elf Beast Tamer Aura. Gets 1500 power when played, so it's 3k on attack. It's also, when it goes to waiting room, ditch a card, look at top 4, choose a level 1 or higher. There's another potential way to get events into hand as well. It's also another potential mill piece too. Filter tool for hand. Exactly what this deck needs. We run Sentiment towards Subordinates Eins. This is the really useful tech piece at 0. It's not only is it a drop search to be able to search out the card we want, it's also when it becomes reversed. You can clock yourself, look at the top 2 cards, and then choose one of them that's level 1 or lower and add it to hand. So a potential plus back to hand to refund its own refund its own card, and a potential drop search in addition to that. It also can add events. Yeah, exactly what we're looking for with this deck. We also run the Vampire Bride package, so run 4 of the Vampire Bride. Power pump, but also to be able to clock yourself with the other cards to get cards into hand or potentially draw into climaxes. Last up, to round out our level 0 lineup, we have the Nature of a Floor Guardian Albedo. On play, you mill a card, and then you can grant a character soul based off the number of soul icons milled. This deck doesn't actually run a whole lot of soul icons, so we're actually not pushing a whole lot of damage that way. So this very likely won't actually hit a soul trigger here. I mean, technically, when you do this, you could mill a CX, and when you mill CX, you pump soul. But for the most part, realistically, we're running it for the second effect. We're running it for the ability to bounce back to hand and give 1000 power, so we can power pump something up, remove a space in the backfield to be able to stand by something in. So power pump on field, space to put it back in something there, hand refunding, exactly what we're wanting in the set for this specific deck. So that's why I run as a 1 of. Realistically, having more than 1 is just not useful because you're going to want those back row slots all the time. Level 1, we have the 2k counter. This is going to help our Eins stay on board, especially if we're able to push that up with the back row 7/5 up to 9. Counter puts it up to 11. So all of a sudden, your opponent has to actually be able to deal with an 11k board of level 1s ready to go. Most people might still have the level 2 tech in place, trying to deal with Alice, but a lot of that level 2 killers are not going to affect these level 1s. You really kind of have to think of it a little bit more like Mushoku in this kind of instance. The Mushoku level 1s being rather big, and having to deal with level 1s and being able to kind of face it and hit on that way. Our level 1 combo we already talked about. We also run the True Vampire Ancestor Chaltier. This is the Vampire Bride package that we saw in the previous build. Same thing, clocking yourself, getting cards to hand. It helps get you to 2 faster, so you can kind of start denying soul faster. And also potentially pushing out more damage because you have two soul bodies on board. But this is really much also kind of that climax get to, right? Knowing if there's a climax on top of the deck or within there, you can kind of clock yourself a little bit to get there. Especially because you know the combo heals on play. So being able to kind of play around that or get to the spots where you need to be and not be level locked out of the next stage. Exactly what you want here. Going to level 2. We had talked about the 2-2 already. We looked a little bit at the event already, but really, what's really important about this event is noting it kind of scales as levels go. So if you're level 2, it only costs 2 stock to play to give the 1500 power and the next 3 soul. If you're playing at level 3, it doesn't give the power and only gives the neg soul, but it also costs 1 more. So it's like it gets more expensive as you get further to or closer to death, which is really interesting. But the fact you can use it starting at level 2, I think is also pretty significant too. We also run Brimming with Confidence Aura. This one is the, again, rest counter. This is the PR version of the one that we got from this set here. But realistically, whichever version you see, it doesn't matter which version, whether the old version or the new version, having the rest counter I think is important here, because you can use this to essentially also deny damage coming at you, right? Being able to just straight up deny in a single lane of attacks is significant. It costs a little bit more than the neg soul counter for obvious reasons, because it does a lot more. It also prevents your opponent from building stock, right? It also prevents them from trying to reverse characters. Like you're able to very much force your opponents to play around these cards by having them in your deck and threatening them in hand. Looking at level 3, our off level 3 is this Energetic Beast Tamer Aura. If it's in center stage, all of your characters get 1500 power. So if this is the front row, you're able to effectively bump up your whole field by 1500 power. It also has the ability of, when you reverse your opponent, you can ditch 2 characters to clock kick. So trying to get those guaranteed damage sticks in by getting reverses. It power pumps itself up. If you have the back row with it, you're looking at 13 in base. 2k counter puts it to 15. The rest counter puts it to 15.5, which is pretty significant here, because that also will beat over Alice numbers. So like you are actually in this kind of defensive range to be able to actually do some pretty significant damage to your opponent, especially because with standby you could bring this out at level 2, put it in the back row, and then the next turn bring it up. Or if you trigger standby throughout your turn, standby out this to the front row, all of a sudden you have now a serious threat to be able to deal with your opponent and then deal damage to your opponent on their turn. Also removes their board, gets them smaller for Alice, for example. So like all of a sudden you have a significant threat that has to be dealt with in some way. Rounding out our game is the level 3 that we looked at earlier, with the heal, with the anti-burn, with the burn ones. This is, I would very much compare this top end to the Cosme top end in Bang Dream. It's just worth noting that this can come online significantly sooner at level 2 versus level 3. So it's definitely something to be aware of as you're going into the fall season, because this deck can catch you by surprise. Ainz isn't the only threat in Overlord. So kind of with that in mind, that's really the deck. The deck is really kind of that defensive stall out, I'm going to win on my terms kind of deck, right? Because every time you slam the climax and change a 2-2 into a 3-2, you get that neg soul counter back to hand. And that's at 2. With that in mind, we'll have gameplay for this on Thursday. Next week, we will have a clock talk. We'll be looking at the BCS. We'll be looking at how Toronto did, as well as how both Germany and Chicago. Trying to get all of those results in and talking about those and where we are currently in the season. Colt and I are going to Chicago, and so we will try to have we'll just kind of share from our experiences a little bit of what that looks like. So with that in mind, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube thing. Until next time, have a good one.